Welcome to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Coming up on today's show, we'll find out why the Democratic Party has become an extension of Wall Street. In the state of Texas, well, they're running out of water, and we'll talk about why they're giving what's left of that water to the gas industry. And grassroots activists are leading the charge for immigration reform. We'll tell you how they've managed to beat the Tea Party at their own game. We have all that and more coming up. And right now, just remember, you've just stepped into the Ring of Fire.
You can't change Washington from the inside. You can only change it from the outside.
Grand jury secrecy rules.
For political gain.
The press can find out.
That has nothing to do with politics, but go ahead.
It wouldn't bother me.
Oops.
Today's Democratic Party has become an extension of Wall Street. We're kidding ourselves if we think that it's just the GOP. Joining me now to talk about the new Wall Street Democrats are attorneys Howard Nations and Dave Sirota. Howard, Wall Street doesn't need Republicans anymore. They have Democrats to do all their fighting and bidding and hustling for them. I mean, I've never seen such a bunch of Wall Street hustling Democrats like we have with this new Democratic Party that's evolved since Bill Clinton.
You know, it's absolutely amazing, Mike, that after the near collapse of the global economy as a result of Wall Street practices, their financial practices, now we're back to the point where, believe it or not, a bill just passed the House Financial Services Committee to allow derivatives trading again. Derivatives, what Warren Buffett referred to as the weapons of mass financial destruction. What you're talking about is the fact that this bill was carried by Democrats. It was drafted by Citigroup. It was sponsored by Democrats who had received Wall Street money. And what we have there is the fox in the hen house. The revolving door policies continue with respect to the financial industry. The White House revolving door, as it turns out, opens onto Wall Street. We've had
Howard, I saw one line. It's 70 lines of the 85-line bill that is supposed to again free up derivative trading, the same thing that brought us this last crash. That 70 of those lines were actually drafted by Citigroup without ever being changed by a Democrat at all. Dave? What's your take on this? What's your picture? What is it that you see developing here?
Well, what's really concerning to me is really the growth of what I would call the Wall Street wing of the Democratic Party, and the squeeze of the progressives at this point. One thing that we've seen more recently with the trial balloon that was floated about nominating Larry Summers for the leadership of the Federal Reserve. When the Obama administration did that, that was very important, and it was a very telling sign about how much Wall Street has controlled Obama's White House. And I think what we need to know, and we need to really look at, is Larry Summers is one of the founding fathers of this Wall Street wing from back in the Bill Clinton days. In the Clinton White House, Larry Summers, working as a protege of Bob Rubin and who is now at Citigroup, working there, he was the one who pushed deregulation of the big banks and deregulation of Wall Street. That was a root cause of the collapse that happened here.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Jack Lew, of course, Chief Operating Officer of Citigroup. You've got Peter, and of course now he's Obama's current Treasury Secretary. You have Peter Orszag, who was Obama's Director of Office of Management and Budget, which is, we've talked about on this program before, that's where all the bills are held up because of, consumers are always affected by a bill doesn't get through there unless the White House wants it to get through. And now this is a guy, Peter Orszag, who is also, he's become Citigroup's vice chairman. Howard, what's in store here? I mean, what's happening to us?
Well, the Democrats are rolling back Dodd-Frank, which is totally outrageous. And then the other thing coming out of the White House is that President Obama, first of all, he placed no strong conditions on bailout money. And then they have not prosecuted one single Wall Street exec There's all sorts of fraud taking place. They're paying fines left and right. They're paying out billions in fines for fraud, but not one single Wall Street exec has been prosecuted. You can't trust the Democrats to regulate Wall Street. And as Senator Paul Wellstone said it best, he said, I'm a member of the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. The other wing is the Wall Street wing of the Democratic Party, which is just unbelievable.
And now the Wall Street wing is clearly winning. Dave, are there Democratic progressives? Full disclosure, I don't know what people think. I'm a Democrat. I'm independent because of this very thing. You almost can't tell a difference between the parties anymore on significant issues. Now, you can on social issues. I mean, things like gender and things like immigration, but where it comes to the issues that put food on people's table, that takes their rights away, Democrats are just an extension of Wall Street. Who are the progressives that are fighting back here?
Well, Paul Wellstone is one of them. You make a really good point, Mike. This is an issue that really should reach across party lines. When you talk about social issues, we have deep divisions between the Democrats and the Republicans. But when you talk about these types of issues, those self-described Tea Party or conservatives, they don't necessarily disagree with a lot of our more progressive drivers that are against Wall Street and against what's been going on. I do want to point out even the fines that are being paid that Howard just talked about by Wall Street are minuscule. They are minuscule compared to the actual effect of what these big banks have done, and no one is standing up to them. They're not standing up.
Dave, don't they do the same thing the pharmaceutical industry does? Once
Absolutely.
They're fined, they simply build the fine into the cost of the pharmaceutical. The banking industry does the same thing. Say, sure, We'll pay a $20 million fine, but we're going to build it in to the cost that flows to you. Howard, as I look at this, I see there's very few progressive. I mean, Sherrod Brown of Ohio, Jeff Merkley of Oregon, Carl Levin of Michigan, Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. Of course, you've got Bruce Braley of Iowa. You have some Democrats out there who get it, who understand that there are no progressives who are paying attention, who are not embarrassed to say, yeah, I consider myself a Democrat because of these very issues.
Well, Sherrod Brown, give him credit. He wants to break up the too big to fail banks, which Holder, the Attorney General, recently said they're also too big to jail. Now, does that need to be broken up? I think so. Senators Levin and Merkley have been doing regulatory review hearings, and they've been having hearings on all these bank scandals. And what they find is all sorts of fraud prevailing out there. As you say, it just becomes a cost of doing business with no criminal prosecutions. Bernie Sanders he's opposing the fast-track trade authority that President Obama wants, because he wants a trade authority, a strategy that'll revise and revive United States manufacturing. So there's a considerable battle between the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party and to some extent the President Obama, but where Obama and the progressives do agree is on increasing minimum wage, on action on the perverse CEO compensation packages, which are designed to reward short-term planning on the part of CEOs as opposed to long-term financial strategy.
Yeah, it used to be a CEO would take over a corporation and be there for 25 or 30 years. Now, if they're there 5, they're in there for quick profits. They don't care what in the hell they do to the stockholders, the shareholders of the company. They're moving through. Dave, let me go to you on this. You mentioned Summers. Now, here, isn't this the litmus test? I mean, you've got an Obama administration who knows, Larry Summers was the one who was supporting Enron up till the week that we found out that they had committed this incredible fraud on all of America. Larry Summers is the guy who went to Bill Clinton and helped with Bob Rubin, helped Bill Clinton move on Glass-Steagall to remove the Glass-Steagall protections we have. he's the guy who has been more responsible for the deregulation that led to the burn down of this economy, at least in the same class, in the same class as Phil Gramm, that led to the same burn down. So here we have an Obama administration say, yeah, this is my guy. I want to put him in charge of the Fed. Isn't that a good reflection of what we're really dealing with here?
It's an unfortunate reflection. It's an unfortunate reflection, really, to the past of tried policies that have failed extremely. This is a man. Let's be clear. So when we talk about deregulation, what that is, this is a man who said we need less rules and less oversight on Wall Street. We need to allow Wall Street to devour itself, essentially, is what happened. He was the one who pushed for that. He was the one who championed that in the Clinton administration, and that was built on leading up to the collapse and caused the collapse. He doesn't have any new ideas.
Well, he's embracing Cory Booker right now. Cory Booker's a nightmare where it comes to consumers versus Wall Street.
It's unbelievable to me. I mean, Cory Booker, and maybe it's because we only get when we look at the mainstream media, we only get snippets or little ideas. You hear that he's the mayor of Newark. And that he's running for the Senate in New Jersey, and that maybe his perception is standing up for the little person or the consumer. But the facts, when you look into who his benefactors are, the moneyed elite that are behind him, the anti-affirmative action groups and the vouchers that he backs,
he's bought and paid
everything.
for by corporate America, and
Exactly.
Again, Obama is embracing him like he's one of them. Howard, what does this mean for consumers? In about a minute, tell me, what is it that consumers do about all this?
Well, that's the difficult part of this, because the golden rule of politics in Washington is he who has the gold makes the rules. And the example of that is if you look at the financial independent, the industry's lobbying versus what consumer groups try to do to protect consumers. In 2009, the consumer group said, we're going to raise $5 million to push for financial reform. In that same time frame, 2009-2010, the financial industry spent $750 million in lobbying. And they're giving money to both parties. They're giving money more to the conservative wing of both parties, to moderate Democrats and to conservative Republicans. And the effect is to push both parties to the right on financial reform. So
guys, it's my call. I got to tell you something I've been talking about lately. It is time for a labor party in the United States. It's time for a third party. There's no better time than right now. Democrats are simply Republicans dressed up in Wall Street Armani suits. That's what we have now. Thanks for joining me. Howard Nation's Dave Tissell. Coming up, we'll tell you how the government really should step in and help solve the growing problem of student loan debt. I'm Mike Papantonio. We'll be right back with more Ring of Fire.
You're watching Free Speech TV, a network powered by the people.
Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. The student loan debt crisis continues to get worse, and so far very few solutions have been offered. But it isn't an impossible problem to solve, and I'm joined now by Salon.com contributor and author David Sirota to tell us what we can do about the problem. David, why is it that we get it right about high school education, about public education in America? We understand that we will invest into high school education because we understand what the ramifications of not doing that might be for our democracy. But we seem to be able to, we can't make that leap where it comes to college education.
Right, and it's a completely outmoded way of thinking that we should have, one set of ways that we finance high school and then another set of ways that we finance college. If you think about what that means to students, it means two different things. For students, now none of this is free, it all has a cost. But for students, what we say to high school students is, listen, you have access to a basic public high school education at no cost to yourself. You do not have to go into debt because we as a society realize that that's necessary. That's a good investment in our future. It's necessary for the next generation. And then arbitrarily, we say, if you want to go to college, you have to go into crushing debt and you have to essentially relegate yourself to paying off that debt in a kind of an indentured financial servitude for, in many cases, the rest of your life. Even though, and this is the key point, even though the economy right now is telling us that a college education is now as necessary in the job market and to our economy as a high school education once was, say, 50 years ago.
I don't care where the sociology or political science or cultural analysis comes from, they all land in the same place, and it is you must have an educated population in order to have successful self-governance. Isn't that part of the equation here?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think that there's two arguments here when it comes to education. There's what do we need to be educated in order to govern ourselves, and then there's what do we need our workforce, what kind of skills does our workforce need to have in order to be economically competitive? And then I would actually maybe add one other thing. There's what does an individual worker need to be competitive in the domestic economy? On all three of these scores, it stands to reason that our society saying that high schools should be free to the student, but college shouldn't be, is an outdated, outmoded way of thinking. If higher education is a necessity, as so many of our politicians and as our economy is saying, then we should treat it as such when we finance it and when we make it available in the ways that we make it available to students.
Dave, I don't care whether it comes from Republicans or Democrats. It comes from both. And you hear the same ridiculous argument, and that is, gee whiz, this is a luxury, that secondary education, a college education is a luxury, and why should the person, why should we just enable people to have this luxury when people all over America are living in poverty? That's the general argument that you hear coming with a straight face from both Republican and Democratic politicians.
That's absolutely right. And if you think about how absurd it is, think where does the logic end? Are we going to start saying that about high school kids? Hey, I'm a taxpayer. I don't want to have to pay for some high school kid to go screw around with soccer practice or take an art class in high school. I shouldn't have to pay for high school. Are we going to start hearing that about what, kindergartners? I mean, when does it end? Oh, those kindergartners are screwing around. We shouldn't have to pay taxes in order to fund a public education for kindergarten and first grade. I mean, the point is that we need to ask ourselves, what is education really all about? And what it's really all about is an investment in ourselves. And the crisis point in America is where self-centeredness and selfishness and an inability to see self-interest in the collective interest has many people saying, well, I don't want to pay for something like education. Well, when you do that, like a business person, when you don't invest in your business, guess what? You're going to get results that aren't as good as they could be for your country if you're not investing in your country.
Well, here is actually a failure to invest in democracy. The sustainable nature of democracy requires that we understand what the hell's going on rather than what is Kim Kardashian wearing to the beach today. And so I think that's part of the problem. Part of it is, David, as you've pointed out, by the way, your article, Start Funding Colleges Like High School, was very good. It was very well thought out. It was, it's the kind of thinking I wish we would see coming every day from corporate America, but it's almost, or corporate media, but it's almost as if they don't get it anyway. That higher education, paying for higher education, is not some kind of sophisticated rip-off scheme that you're suggesting here. You're saying it's a fundamental need, and it is. It should be. We consider high school education a right, don't we? If we're carrying on a conversation about high school education, we say that's a natural right. We're a civilized society. We naturally should educate at least at the high school level. And you're saying that we're 20 years behind that now. We're 20 years where we have to have a technical education. We have to be able to compete in different cultures, different languages, different ideas. And if we can't do that, we're relegated to kind of a country of savages where we become, where the barbarians come in and take what they want. Isn't that kind of a big threat here?
Absolutely. I mean, think about the way we fund, the way we finance high school. What we say is we're going to have a broad-based, broad tax base, primarily by property tax, but also with state funding, and that is then distributed. And we say that we're all going to chip in, whether we have kids, whether we don't have kids, whether we've gone to high school, whether we've not gone to high school. We all pay taxes into this general fund so that kids who are of high school age, they can go to a public high school as a right of citizenship. Then once they turn 18 or 18 and a half, when they graduate high school, we suddenly say, okay, listen, even though the economy is saying that you need increasingly some form of higher education, whether that's 2 years college, 4-year college, vocational, technical education, whatever it is, the economy is saying you need higher education. And suddenly we're going to say, all right, we're not going to all chip in with taxes. What we're going to say to you, the individual student, is you have to go into massive crushing debt that may take you the rest of your life to pay off in order to get that thing that the economy is saying that you absolutely need. How moral or immoral is that? I'd say it's immoral. I'd say it's arbitrary. It's completely arbitrary. And remember, when I say arbitrary, think about the history here. There was a time in our history where the idea of free high school education was kind of a radical idea. And then we said, hey, you know, that's a necessity for our country. What we need is updated thinking to say, look, if the economy is telling us that higher education is necessary, then let's treat it financially as a society as if it's
we've done
necessary.
just the opposite. Matt Taibbi, of course, as you point out in your article, did just such a great analysis of so many parts of this, talking about the idea when a kid comes through school right now, through college, they owe $27,000, moving into an economy to where if they can get a job flipping burgers with that degree, they have really arrived, because we're turning wholly into a service or service/financials economy where we don't build things, we don't engineer things, the architects don't have places to work, the engineers don't have places to work unless they go overseas. So it's not a very good deal, and it's almost as if as it exists right now, the whole college story, you can do better if you go to college, is almost a myth right now, isn't it?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, you're getting at a fundamental problem in the economy, and I want to be very clear. I think you could have a nation of PhDs right now. Everybody has higher education, advanced degrees, and the entire country could have PhDs. We'd still have economic problems. So I don't think that college is the economic cure-all, but it's certainly increasingly a necessity for global competitiveness. And what we're saying to our young people is, you can go to college, but with college costs skyrocketing, you've got to essentially risk being in debt for the rest of your life, because even if you have a college education, it's no guarantee. You get out into a weak job market and you may not be able to pay back those loans. Now, here's some good news. The state of Oregon has pioneered a program. They're looking into an idea of saying, look, kids, you can go to school for free, but when you graduate, if you go to a public university in Oregon, you have to contribute 3% of your income back to the state, regardless of what your income is. Now, the genius of this is that it doesn't say you have to go make $1 zillion in order to pay this back. You don't have to make career choices based purely on whether you can pay back your loans, because it's 3% of whatever you actually end up making.
It's pay it forward kind of concept,
That's right. That's exactly
David,
right.
as I was reading your article and your ideas here, I was wondering how much you agree or disagree with, say, Matt Taibbi's position on what this administration has done with education. What is your take?
Well, look, I think the Obama administration has certainly not gone far enough. It's continuing to echo the old idea that debt and individual tuition is the way to look at college when it comes to student, that a student should have to go into debt. Now, I think the administration has done the right thing by trying to deal with the skyrocketing amounts of debt. And I think that the administration, I don't think they played tough enough with the private bankers who are still making lots of money off of this. And I think that the government programs that are bringing in, through interest on some of these loans, more money than they're putting out, essentially harvesting money from young people, is fundamentally immoral. The government shouldn't be making a profit off of young people.
The profit is staggering. It's
unbelievable.
It's staggering what the government is making off of these $187 million dollars, where it used to be, we used to say, well, you've got the private industry that's taking advantage of the student. Now, if you take a look at these numbers, you go, my God, I mean, this has become a cash cow for government. Rather than government saying we have responsibility to educate these people, they're simply trying to say, how can we make more profit by making it difficult for people to go to college? That is kind of the way this whole thing lands, doesn't it?
That's right, and absolutely. And I would say, look, you could make the argument, well, if the government uses some of that money, that extra money, to invest in more loans, maybe that's okay. But again, my take is this. that President Obama has an opportunity to use the bully pulpit to say, look, the whole notion of kids going into debt to get a college education is flawed. And we need to have an entirely new attitude, a new way of thinking about college that says we as a country as a whole are going to invest in this so that the old debt for education model is a thing of the past, just like it is a thing of the past. It actually never was when it comes to high school. Unless we're going to open up the idea and say, listen, maybe we should charge kids tuition for high school. Maybe we should charge kids tuition for middle school. I mean, if we're going to go down that road, let's have that conversation.
$184 billion over 10 years is simply, it's a lack of priorities. It's a lack of where of rational thought in how we place our priorities. You know, let's cut back on defense. Let's not have government making $184 billion in interest and simply replacing Wall Street with government and have a disaster where it comes to the future of this country in educating our children. David Sirota, as usual, great reporting, great original thought went into this, and I appreciate you joining me.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
David Sirota is the author of the book Hostile Takeover. When we come back, we'll find out why the state of Texas is allowing itself to be fracked to death. I'm Mike Papantonio. We'll be right back with more Ring of Fire.
Stand up, stand up.
Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. The state of Texas is experiencing one of the worst droughts in its history, but that hasn't stopped them from giving the gas industry access to its fresh water for fracking. Joining me now to talk about this is Farron Cousins, executive editor of the Trial Lawyer magazine. You know, Farron, Thomas Frank, of course, wrote the book, What's the Matter with Kansas? It was a great book. I think it's time for him to come forward with a book, What's the Matter with Texas? What in the hell are they thinking out there? About 74% of the state is in severe drought. You have them having to bring in water 60 miles away just so they can have drinking water in some parts of Texas, and they're still allowing the fracking industry to frack them out of existence. What's up down there?
Well, in the state of Texas, there's no money in water, but there's plenty of money in the natural gas fracking industry. Right, you know, remember, Texas is the state that, you know, Dirty Energy built. That's their home base. That's where you've got all the oil, and now the frackers are coming in trying to take what's left of the natural gas out of the ground. And so these companies decide that it doesn't matter that citizens are literally going thirsty. I mean, all across the state in some areas, you've got places that are having to go through water rationing. People will go to their faucets, turn them on, and nothing comes out. And it could be like that for days at a time because there's no precipitation, so there's no water. And instead, what they're doing is they're giving what's left to the fracking companies so they can pump it full of chemicals into the ground, which just further contaminates what little groundwater is left in Texas.
All right, well, let's back up. You got 30 communities, right? At the very least, from what we can tell, about 30 communities that are going to be completely out of water by the end of this year, according to projections out there. Now, those 30 communities are some of them right in the heart of Frackville, and you're still hearing that line, well, by golly, it smells like money to me. I mean, they don't even have water. They can't turn on a sprinkler. They can't fill their swimming pool. They can't even turn on a tap without having to bring water in. There's some communities, from what I see, Farron, that are having San Angelo, for example, is having to bring in water from 60 miles away. That's just basic drinking water.
It is, and you got to remember too that this is water that goes to plant crops and feed crops. Those crops then go to feed livestock. I mean, there are massive crop deaths throughout Texas, massive livestock deaths. So not only are the people not having anything to drink, but this is severely affecting the food supply for the entire country. You know, this is not simply a Texas, selling off our water to the fracking companies story. This affects the whole food chain, basically, for America.
Okay, so they take fresh water that they ought to be drinking, and each fracking operation, the number is anywhere between 6 to 10 million gallons of fresh water that they use, rather than using recycled water. What's wrong with using recycled water? Are they concerned it's going to cost them a little extra money, or what's the deal?
Well, it always comes down to money, and some reports actually show that just across the country, fracking is gobbling up about 140 billion gallons of water every year. And in the state of Texas in particular, it's gotten so bad that according to America blog, there's actually residents who are selling leases on their own land to fracking companies to extract water. And they're paying them up to $36,000 a month just to be able to come on their land, drill some water wells so that they have enough water to frack. And
well, the problem with that is they're stealing from the aquifer for the entire state.
Yes.
In other words, the water may be on their land, but it's affecting the aquifer for the entire state. So yeah, they're getting $30,000 a month, but in the process, they're depriving their neighbor of water. I mean, isn't it just this selfish cycle that just continues to spin down there in Texas?
It is, and you also now, what's remarkable is you have these, energy industry front groups. So one group in particular called Energy in Depth, they've now come out and they're creating these so-called fact sheets about how much water is actually being used in the fracking process. And they say, well, when you think about it, it's really just a drop in the bucket because there's golf courses all over the country that use a lot of water too. We use water in car washes, so don't worry about what's being lost to fracking. They even say that millions of gallons of fresh water are flowing from the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico, which somehow to them is wasteful.
Well, one thing that doesn't happen at a car wash is you don't put chemicals, or say less a golf course, you don't intentionally inject chemicals, toxic carcinogenic chemicals into the water and then shoot it down 1,000 feet to try to hide it and have it come back up in the drinking aquifer. The comparison is inane. It's absurd, but you're saying they're using that comparison, and of course if we predict what the Texas legislature is going to do with it, I mean that is like bonehead central. So you've got the Texas legislature, rather than acting on anything, rather than saying, gee whiz, 30 communities are not going to have drinking water by the end of this year, their answer is they're going to do some studies on it. Isn't that kind of how they always handle this problem?
It is. Whenever they don't want to give you an answer, they say they're going to do a study on it. That's the same thing that's happened with the Keystone XL pipeline. But the Texas legislature is completely owned by the oil and gas industries. They're the top campaign contributor in the state of Texas. I believe so far this year they've already spent over $3 million on lobbying on every issue from taxes to real estate law. I mean, they will lobby anything that they think is going to benefit them, and they're the top spenders in the state. You can't
part
outdo
of this
that money.
story is really Texas in decline, isn't it? Isn't that the bigger story here, Farron? First of all, what you have is you have this industry. I think of BP in Texas. They were just hit again for price fixing right there in Texas, because Texas is kind of like crime central for the oil and gas industry. People like BP flourish in a state like Texas. So they, rather than saying to BP, you know what, you need to pay taxes to pay for the roads that you take your trucks over. And you fracking companies, you need to pay for some of these roads as you use them to bring water back and forth or to bring equipment back and forth. I just saw a story, Farron, where they're actually using gravel on roads rather than repaving them with asphalt because they don't have enough money to pay for paved roads. Isn't that Texas in decline because they won't do what they're supposed to do with corporate America?
That is, and they ignore the fact that these oil trucks and these natural gas trucks and all this equipment they bring in, that has the potential to tear up roads about 10 times faster than regular automobile traffic. So the industry, Texas is owned by the oil and gas industry. There's no way around that, and they know that they can get away with whatever they want to do in the state of Texas. And then to make matters worse, when you go back to the drought issue, you now have all these, water privatization vultures circling over the state of Texas. Right? They want to gain control of what's left of the water supply and then basically sell it at a higher cost to the fracking company, who can easily buy it more easily than a private citizen could. So, the state of Texas is going to dry up.
Didn't Bechtel try that down in Bolivia, Farron? Bechtel went down to Bolivia and they tried to own the water to where it would have cost the average citizen of Bolivia about 25% of their income simply to buy drinkable water.
Right, and it basically almost started a civil war in Bolivia, because when people don't have water, they can't survive. Bechtel down in Bolivia is a great story. They cut off services to areas all over the place because the private company said, you know what, it's going to be too costly for us to send water your direction. You can't do that. But at the same time, we've lobbied our dictator to make it illegal for you to collect rainwater to distill and drink. They had a monopoly on all the water. Water from the pipes, water from the sky.
Now, understand, this is Bechtel, of course, U.S. corporation that goes down there saying we would rather have these people die of dehydration rather than not make a profit, and the profit was about 25% of the income. But this story in Texas, I think the thing I'm seeing about it I think is so unusual is how little sympathy there is for the folks in Texas. When you really take a look at the blogs, you take a look at the reaction to all this, it's like, you know what, they did it to themselves. By golly, let them burn up into a dust bowl. I don't know how you change that kind of PR, and they need to. How do you change that kind of PR when you've got a guy like Rick Perry or Ted Cruz at the helm of the state of Texas?
It's almost impossible. You've got to have somebody like a Wendy Davis come in, who is this strong figure, and say, look, we're not going to let these corporations kill us. Because don't kid yourself, these corporations are killing people in Texas.
Yeah, well, look, the crazy part about all this, and they know the numbers, the folks in Texas know the numbers, that they used 600 million gallons of fresh drinkable water, injected in the ground so they could get 400 million gallons of oil. So in other words, they've lost this drinking water. They've lost forever. It's not like it's ever going to be used again. It's so contaminated. They have to deep well inject it about 1,000 feet into the ground and hope. And it's already happening, but it's coming up in people's aquifers right now, where they turn on the spigot, and as you point out, they can light the spigot and a fire ignites.
Yeah.
So the story to me is all you have to do is do the numbers here. Then you have to figure out who is this for? This is not for American citizens, because this gas goes, where does it go? The price fixing with BP, they found that BP was holding on to the gas and shipping it around the world when they can make a higher price to fix prices.
Right, that's what always happens. Anything we extract out of the ground here in the U.S., they go sell it on the global market because they can make more money selling it to China or India than they can selling it here at home. And that's what people don't understand, is that this is not gas that's going to all stay in this country. We're destroying our own country, basically, to sell oil and gas to somebody else. And this is
what we're used to seeing this is what America has done to third world countries for so long, isn't it, Farron? You go down to South Africa, you extract everything you can, you leave a disaster. You pull a Chevron where you go to South America or South Africa, destroy the entire environment, extract everything you can, leave the people in a squalor, leave the people with health problems, leave the infrastructure in a disaster. You take all the profits and you go home. That's, for example, what BP has done in the United States, right here in the Gulf of Mexico. This is exactly what they did. That's the new mentality, the globalization mentality, isn't it, Farron?
It is, and it's very sad that they know they can no longer go to these countries, because at a lot of places they've been told, you cannot ever come back here and do business. So now they realize, hey, well, the U.S. is basically operating like a third world country when it comes to regulations and safety standards. So why don't we just stay here at home and destroy things here?
Yeah, it's a lot cheaper. You don't have to go overseas. You stay here at home and destroy the United States state by state. Fortunately, they're starting out with Texas first. Maybe the rest of the states will start paying attention. Farron Cousins, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Just ahead, we'll take a look at how the immigration reform battle is being won by grassroots activists. I'm Mike Papantonio, and you're watching Ring of Fire. We'll be right back.
Tune into Free Speech TV for Democracy Now!, a national, independent, award-winning news program bringing you people and perspectives rarely seen on corporate media.
Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Congress has been in recess for about a month, but the fight for immigration reform hasn't slowed down. Grassroots groups are keeping up the fight, and I'm joined now by author David Neiwert to tell us how these groups are winning the immigration battle. David, the immigration issue in America is tearing the Republican Party apart. And as you look at just what corporate media is reporting, they're missing the story about who's winning this fight, aren't they?
Well, yeah. You would never gather that this is actually strongly in favor of the people who are supporting immigrant rights. This is all falling their way, as well it should, because that's the only outcome that's actually going to work, is if we actually discard this old nativist approach that's been the favorite approach of Republicans for the last 20 years, and move on to something that actually makes sense.
Molly Ball did a great story. She's a great writer with The Atlantic, did a great story where she started following the two sides. Who are the party that, the group that wants they want immigration reform, and the group that's trying to completely stop it in its tracks. And what is your take on how the numbers are adding up, how you see this fight taking place?
Well, my take is that they're fighting right now. They're basically fighting over how they can sell this to their voters, their Tea Party voters. I don't think the numbers are going to break down in favor of immigration reform in the House anytime soon, at least until we replace the Republican leadership that's running the show there. I see them having a very difficult time getting immigration reform out of the House.
So is that part of the reason, if you follow writers like Molly Ball and other people who've followed this story, they're saying that you have the anti-reform people that they're holding rallies and nobody's showing up. They're reporting that, with the Patriot group, the militia groups, that the border groups, that most of those people are in jail now. I mean, if you look at the militia groups, I think you and I did a story on this one time where you have the two leaders of those border patrol militia kinds of groups, the Minutemen type groups. They're in prison or on their way to prison. One for child molestation, and the other one for breaking into a home and killing an occupant.
Yes.
So have they lost steam, do you think, at this point, David? Has this anti-immigration movement lost steam because they might think that there's no problem because the House of Representatives isn't going to do anything?
Well, I think that I don't know that they've lost steam in terms of their political hold in Congress, but I do think that out there in the public that they've totally lost steam. They've completely lost credibility. And the funny thing about it is, Mike, what you hear now from Republicans is that they're not going to pass immigration reform unless they get border security, unless they can totally secure the border, which is this is what the Minutemen and these border militias were all about. That was what they were doing, was kind of selling this story, this idea that we could shut down the border if we actually if we manned it and stuff like this, and we could stop this invasion from Mexico. Well, in reality, of course, the invasion, as it were, has stopped because of economic forces. the American economy's gone in the toilet, and the Mexican economy has recovered quite well. So those two factors have actually slowed the flow of immigration a great deal. But more than that, they're still saying in Congress that the Republicans are still saying that we need to have this completely secure border. And what that seems to represent in reality is building a giant wall and manning it every 20 feet or so.
Yeah. Which we know is not going to work. Look, if you look at this story,
huge amounts of money.
Yeah, if you look at this story, part of the story that really is a little aggravating is the way that the anti-reform people are trying to inflame African Americans against immigrants. I don't know if you followed that part of the story, but that is a big part of the story. The fact that they're trying to inflame African Americans by coming up with what looks like grassroots anti-reform people, but if you really land this story, it is maybe the anti-reform people just really don't care about this issue because they know that they're covered in the House, that the House of Representatives, as crazy as they are, as lunatic as that House has become, that nothing's going to move out of the House that's really going to change or improve the immigration standards in America. Isn't that part of it?
Yeah, I think that's true. Although I do think that it sure reflects their desperation that they are going to this sort of racial wedge issue by recruiting blacks. They've been doing this for quite a while. But it's really stepped up in recent months, partly because I think that they've realized that they can't gain any more traction out there among white voters. I mean, even white voters are realizing that immigration reform is the right thing to do. And it's totally turning against them. So what they're trying to do now is make it into a sort of racial wedge issue with black people. And I don't think that's going to work.
Well, at the end of the day, one thing we are sure of, it is tearing the Republican Party apart, and they're falling on their own traps. And in the end, it is going to be a long-term problem for this party. David Neiwert, thank you for joining me. Okay.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
The home foreclosure crisis in America has been made worse by foreclosure mills that law firms run to make a quick buck. And they aren't afraid to skirt the law to do that. Joining me now to talk about this is securities attorney James Kauffman. James, you remember back in law school how you could almost look at a law school class and decide who are the thugs, who are the ones that are going to represent corporations and insurance companies, and all to the detriment of consumers. There was a very clear division, I suppose, just like there is in almost any profession, whether it's medical profession, political, whatever. You could see that division in law school, and you always kind of understood who the thugs were going to be. Tell us about the thugs in this story. This is an outrageous story. There should be some lawyers going to prison right along with the banks who made all this happen.
Yeah, well, Pap, in the foreclosure industry, there's a lot of thugs that represent all of the banks and the servicers foreclosing on people, and it's just a handful of law offices. It's one or two solo practitioners. They continue all of these foreclosures. They work on volume, really, and they just foreclose without even reading the paperwork, without even attesting what they're looking at. They foreclose on families, and they steal homes, and they make money. And those are the thugs.
It's worse than that, isn't it? These are bill mills. These law firms are like huge bill mills. They actually make more money if they foreclose on a house rather than doing what they should do, and then that's to give the homeowner a chance to come back in and modify the loan to where they can pay it off over time. The bill mill, these lawyers that have these very ugly, disgusting bill mills that should be closed down, are at this point we find that they're manufacturing documents. They're just making stuff up. They're destroying documents. They've been involved in robo signings where they simply just sign fictitious names to fictitious documents, and they're still nobody's gone to jail at this point, are they? Who's doing the most about this?
The Colorado Attorney General, John Souther, is doing the most about this, and he is actually looking into these practices, and he's finding, for instance, that these foreclosure mills, if you will, these law firms that just make more money off of foreclosing than what they should be doing, which is granting or allowing people to modify. What they're doing is they have so many different steps that they make money on. A good, for instance, is if they put the notice on the door, it's only supposed to cost $25 to the law firm to send somebody and put the notice on the door. They bill that out at $300.
In other words, you're going to foreclose on a house. The law requires you give them notice. Costs $25 or less to do that, and then they bill it out to $300, and then the homeowner then has to pay the $300 on top of all that.
That's
now,
right.
Isn't there another problem here, and that is that the law firm that has these bill mills that are just making gazillions of dollars by just abusing homeowners, they have a conflict, a legal conflict, and that is if they leave the homeowner in the house and let the homeowner pay it off over time, the investors into these securities that own these derivatives, the CDOs, the synthetics, the investors actually make more money, but the law firm makes less money because the law firm's paid by the hour to try to get the person out of the house.
That's right. There's more money to be made at all these steps to try to get the homeowner out of the house. Then once you give them the modification, then although that's good for the investors, that's actually good for anyone who owns a mortgage-backed security. That's good for them, but it's bad for the law firm. They don't make as much money. For instance, the Colorado Attorney General, just on those tacking the notices on the door, 2 law firms that handle Colorado made over $20 million the last 4 years just putting notices on the door.
Isn't the other thing that they're doing with that, they're actually involved in price fixing for, in other words, one law firm calls the other law firm, says, listen, to do this particular, to go through this process, we're going to charge X number of dollars. Will you charge the same thing? Isn't that just pure antitrust price fixing? I mean, how are these people staying in business? Didn't we have the same thing happen in Florida? It's going on in Florida right now, isn't it?
It's the same thing we saw in Florida, and what you see is that the mortgage servicers use a technology, and that technology is licensed out to the servicers, and the law firms pay these huge fees for the technology, and they sign agreements that the servicer can only use 1 or 2 law firms. So they have a monopoly in that state, and there's only a handful, 1 or 2 law firms that can foreclose for the servicer in that state. They sign those agreements, it's a monopoly, and they're allowed to charge whatever they want. So they can charge $300 for tacking a notice on your door. They can charge $600 for supposedly filing a document in court that they never filed.
But
some of the filings
isn't the
are never
heart
made.
of it, these law firms are making up documents. They're involving themselves in perjury. They're involving themselves in all types of conduct that really should entitle them to one type of bill mill. I guess you can call it that, the bill mill of the prison system.
That's
and I mean, hopefully, in Colorado, this Attorney General will keep pushing this, and it'll be an example for these bill mills all over the country. You don't abuse consumers by kicking it out of the house so you can make a few extra dollars. James, thank you for joining me. It's a story that it's outrageous to me. It's infuriating to me.
Thank you, Pat.
That's it for this week's Ring of Fire, but you can keep up with us throughout the week online at ringoffireradio.com or on Twitter at Ring of Fire Radio or on Facebook. I'm Mike Papantonio, and we'll see you next week right here on Ring of Fire.